Maya stood at the edge of the dance floor as if the room were a glass box and she, a fragile museum piece. The party thrummed around her, laughter ricocheting off the high ceilings, clinking glasses, the perfume of strangers. But she felt every sound as a verdict. People smiled in the general way people do when they mean nothing. Eyes skimmed like cursory weather reports. Each sideways glance became a sentence in an invisible indictment. Not enough, too strange, too loud, too quiet. Tonight was meant to be a celebration. Instead, it had become a lesson in erasure. Ever since the video at work edited, captioned, and merciless, Maya had become a character in other people's stories. They joked. They whispered. They posted. Her name tasted different in her mouth. She kept her hands folded as if protecting something precious. The memory of a song she used to hum under her breath, a melody that once threaded her days into something bearable. And then, like a single light in fog, a piano edge cut through the noise. He took his place at the upright near the window, fingers hovering over ivory keys, and the first notes fell into the room with the certainty of home. The melody was hers, a worn fragment she had loved since childhood. Around her, 1,000 faces blurred. For a breath, the verdict stopped. For a heartbeat, the world held its question in abeyance. She felt the old, raw ache in her ribs loosen, and something in her folded open. The office video had been meant to be funny. A clip of Maya, 2 coffees in hand, and an earnest attempt to cheer a stressed-out intern. In the raw footage, she had danced, awkward, spontaneous, ridiculous, between cubicles, pirouetting past solemn monitors and frowning colleagues. In her memory, it had been a relief, a bright minute of absurdity in gray days. In their world, it became a headline. When she first saw it go up, she thought it was a whispered joke among close colleagues. The first few comments, laughing emojis, playful tags, felt like the small, harmless abrasions of modern life. Then the shares multiplied. Someone stitched it with a caption that steamed her. "When the office clown thinks she's Beyoncé." People she barely knew liked it. People she respected forwarded it and added their own commentary. The sense of being seen, once a tender thing, curdled into exposure. She arrived at the office the morning after to find the air altered. Her desk was a small peninsula in a sea of suppressed smiles. Conversations tapered when she walked by. Her manager, who earlier applauded her team's spirit, said, "Maybe tone it down in meetings, Maya." The voice was soft, perfunctory, more puzzlement than cruelty, but it landed like a verdict. She found herself replaying the scene in which she danced and feeling her cheeks burn anew. Shame has a peculiar gravity. It pulls everything toward the center and makes the rest of the world orbit as if out of focus. At home, messages came in, some kind, many not. One anonymous DM suggested she learn to act her age. Another, less coded, suggested she should try being normal. A forwarded meme from her cousin called her dramatic. The chorus of small humiliations hummed until she hardly recognized the cadence of her own heart. Her sister Noor called that evening. "Just delete it," Noor urged. "Block, report, whatever, it's temporary." "It feels permanent," Maya said. Her voice had the brittle edge of someone with a small cracked bone. How do you explain permanence to people who believe anything can be undone with a click? "It's not just a clip, Noor. It's everyone's idea of me." "Then be someone else," Noor said, a sharpness in her tone that was more fear than contempt. "Show them why it hurts." But reinvention, Maya knew, cannot be summoned like a new outfit. She tried apology after apology, messages to colleagues, a short, mortifying note on her feed about being silly and human. The likes were polite. Nobody seemed to read the apology for what it was, a small, frightened hand reaching for cover. What nobody did was ask, "Are you okay?" They had peered and judged and moved on. Work became a choreography of avoidance. Her jokes clipped at the edges, her emails overly formal. In meetings, she shrank behind slides. An invitation to present a project, normally a career milestone, felt like a threat. When her name lit up on the projection screen, she froze, imagining the playback of that viral second puncturing the room like an uninvited truth. It was at the client party, a week later, that judgment would complicate into something else entirely. The agency had planned an intimate celebration for the launch. Strings of soft lights, a keyboard planted by the bay windows, a curated playlist. Maya told herself she would stay only an hour, make a face at a few platters, and return home to the safety of her apartment. But walking into a room where a single melody could reopen a wound was like stepping into a cold sea knowing you had to swim. People clustered in small groups. They moved around the piano like cautious fish. The laughter here held the same sheen as at the office, smiling but thin. Then, from somewhere, a man tall with a winter jacket still buttoned slid onto the piano bench. He was not part of the agency. He looked like someone who had wandered in from the street seeking warmth. He had a quietness about him, like someone used to being mid-scene in someone else's life. He placed his hands on the keys and did not play the party's upbeat current. Instead, he threaded a melody that scraped something inside Maya and made it bleed up into her throat. It was a song her grandmother had once hummed while folding laundry, slow, bittersweet, and unmistakably hers. The piano's voice bent into the corners of the room, gathering stray attention. Maya tried to count the beats, to anchor herself in measurement, but her chest remembered the song in a way her brain could not parcel. She had not heard it outside her childhood home in years. When he reached the middle of the piece, he looked up, only for a blink, and met her eyes. The contact was small but seismic. In that instant, she felt as though someone had translated her private memory into the public language of the room. Something like recognition passed between them, and it carried no mocking undertone. If anything, it was an invitation. A woman near her snorted and made a joke about the piano man, and lips curved into amused smiles, but the sound was shallow. Maya stepped closer to the piano without deciding to. Her feet moved. The world tightened into a narrow channel where only she and the music existed. She let the melody wrap around her ribs and drop into the place where shame had nested. She thought of all the times she had danced alone. Kitchen lit by the refrigerator soft light, bedroom door closed tight, a private audience of ghosts that did not publish, ridicule, or dissect. This dance had nothing to do with performance. The first step out of the crowd was an act of defiance against the version of herself everyone else had circulated. The second step was an act of reclamation. Her shoulders loosened. The spectral weight of their laughter diminished as the song fed some neglected muscle memory. The sway of hips, the small, ridiculous arc of her arms. She danced the way she had in the clip, but now with eyes wide open. People parted, a surprised aisle formed as if the room were making way. Some whispered, some filmed, no one shouted. He kept playing, fingers steady, and the piano seemed to say, "Go on. Keep going." In the melody's curve, she found a steadying logic. Even if they had already decided her story, she could, in this small theater of light and notes, write a different one. When the song finished, the room held a breath that was not quite applause. He closed the piano with a lightness that suggested nothing but a job done. He gave her a small, courteous nod, and like a passerby who had stopped to return a stray item, rose and walked toward the exit. Maya stood on the floor, palms damp and heartbeat loud, feeling both naked and unbroken. The gasp that escaped her chest had no audience, yet somehow felt like a verdict of a different sort. Finally, she had remembered herself. Still, conflict would not dissolve with a single tune. The day after, the clip of her dancing at the piano was already cropping up in social feeds. This time the angle was different. Some accounts framed it as Maya's comeback, others as the same girl, still silly. Comments argued in the form of emojis. Somewhere, a thread called her attention-seeking. Somewhere else, older women praised her courage. The world, as always, continued to speak in a multiplicity of tongues. Maya's inner voice, however, had found a new syllable: defiance. It whispered, not without fear, that she could choose the narrative she offered the world. What did defiance look like in practice? At first it was small gestures. Wearing the bright dress she kept reserved for private victories, leaving a voicemail instead of a text, replying to a snide comment with the straight truth. Each time she stretched a limb toward authenticity, it felt like both weight-lifting and weight-lightening. A secondary character emerged in the days that followed, a colleague named Jonah, whose smile was a little too easy and whose compliments often carried a barb. He had been the one to forward the original video to an influencer with the careless curiosity of a man who thought virality was a sport. Jonah's presence in the office became a calibration point for Maya's resilience. He would offer her project feedback that sounded helpful, but often ended in a phrase that tightened at the edges. Maybe don't make everything about yourself, Maya. The subtext was familiar. It meant perform within your assigned limits. Then there was Elise, a quiet senior designer who began bringing her coffee to Maya's desk and offering an unadorned kind of solidarity. Elise did not flinch when Maya's hands shook over the keyboard. She simply slid a napkin into view and said, "I liked your presentation, by the way." She had a way of saying the small truth without decorating it. Those small truths added themselves like stitches. But external pressures continued. The client who once valued Maya's creative risks began to favor safer choices. An award the team could have won went to a project with predictable metrics rather than emotional courage. Maya felt invisible in triumph and painfully visible in failure. Her inbox, which had been a place of professional validation, now felt like a courtroom. Amid this, the piano man, who she learned was named Liam, reappeared in intermittent, uncanny ways. He wasn't part of her social circle, nor did he seem connected to the agency. He lived as if in a parallel, quieter life, a barista by morning and a performer in ways that did not demand limelight. Their subsequent encounters were accidental, gracious, and charged with a gentle curiosity that widened her chest. "You're brave," he told her once, over the clatter of closing time plates in a small cafe. "Brave," Maya echoed. "To dance in public and still show your face the next day," he said. There was no condescension in his voice, only certainty. She wanted to ask him why he had played that exact song, why he had found the memory that fit her like a glove. But questions sometimes break the fragile tenderness of moments. Instead, she asked, "Why did you play it?" He shrugged, eyes amused. "Because it's a song that needs to be danced to, and because sometimes strangers know the music you forgot." Maya found his answers irritatingly simple and uncomfortably true. Knowing someone had seen past the public story and chosen to restore a private one unsettled her. She had lived, for too long, in the proviso of being defined by other people's snapshots. Liam's indifference to spectacle was a mirror she hadn't known she needed. Their conversations deepened slowly. They spoke of small things, favorite coffees, the way certain cities smelled in winter, and then of more precarious subjects. The anatomy of shame, the cost of being quirky in a world that favors moderation. Liam had his own crooked history with judgment. He had walked out of a conservatory program when the tutors insisted music be precise and palatable. He preferred imperfection, the way a wrong note could open a truth. As Maya's relationship with Liam matured into a quiet tether, new external conflicts sharpened. Jonah's barbed comments escalated to a meeting that felt like interrogation. "We're worried about brand image," he told her, leaning forward as if about to impart a generous secret. "Public perception matters. We need to be careful who represents us." "Who says I represent you?" Maya asked, the small defense of someone who has been surprised by the ownership of their own life. Jonah's laugh was soft. "We all do, whether we like it or not." At home, her mother began to preface calls with more caution. "Are you sure you should keep dancing like that?" she would ask, not out of dislike for the art but from a fear of social cost. In that fear, Maya heard a generational echo, the idea that safety equaled currency. The question tightened her throat until it felt like a knot. The tension outside created a pressure inside. Maya began to oscillate between daring and retreat. She accepted an invitation to teach a small, informal dance workshop at a local community center, drawn by the idea of movement as language. The workshop was a microcosm of everything she wanted and feared. Half the attendees were curious, half were cynical, and a few were eager to unlearn their caution. Teaching felt like a return to self she had misplaced, language in motion, breath as punctuation. One woman, an older attendee named Mrs. Ortega, came to the front at the end of the class, eyes bright. "You made me remember how to move like myself," she said, and the sentence landed with the contentment of a small miracle. It was the kind of validation that Jonah's critiques could never reach. It was authentic and human and grounding. Yet, as Maya stepped into the world with more deliberate movement, vindication from strangers came tinted with spectacle. A local blogger posted about her workshop with a headline that read, Office girl turns dance therapist, A must watch. The article was well-meaning, but framed her as a novelty. She was now both object of empathy and specimen of curiosity. Meanwhile, an email arrived that would set the rising pressure into more combustible territory. The agency was offering a televised segment highlighting employees' authentic sides. The producers wanted her on. The optics were tantalizing, a broadcast smile, a chance to reshape the narrative. But the seat at that table had stakes. It required vulnerability mic'd and framed for audiences that had already judged her. She wrestled with the decision. Her immediate circle argued, nor counseled caution. Elise urged her to take control of the narrative. Liam watched quietly, reserving neither pressure nor instruction. "You must want it for yourself," he said finally. "Not to prove them wrong, but because you'd like to tell your truth." To accept would be to open a door into a room where millions could stand on the other side and decide. To decline would be to let others decide what her silence meant. The nights of debating churned until a new pressure point arrived. Jonah's new hashtag campaign at work, #professional image, targeted what he claimed was brand inconsistency. It had, thinly veiled, a clear current. People like us don't get to be public eccentrics. At the televised segment, the producer asked the same exchangeable questions that made people feel armchair judged. When did you first realize people were watching? How did you feel when the clip blew up? Do you regret it? The cameras were kind and merciless at once. Maya felt them like a tangible warmth on her skin. When asked if she regretted dancing in the office, a reflexive, honest laugh escaped her. "No," she said. "I regret nothing about finding joy." Her openness earned a different response than she expected. Some comments were empathetic, others were patronizing. But among the feedback, something shifted. Viewers saw not just the viral second, but the longer arc of a human who had refused to let a moment define her entirety. The segment aired, and while the pattern of judgment did not vanish, a growing chorus offered a counter-narrative. That people could be more than the worst screenshot of their lives. Back at the office, Jonah's tone softened only slightly. "I won't say you were wrong to speak on it," he conceded in a neutral voice. "But public opinion can be messy. Messy, yes, but in the messy residue, alliances formed. Elise nominated Maya for a leadership opportunity in a small pro bono campaign that valued emotional risk. Nor, after a long, awkward dinner where she admitted her fear of gossip, texted, 'I'm proud of you.' Liam bought tickets for a low-stakes recital Maya had been too scared to attend and sat in the audience like an unblinking star, applauding in ways that made her feel seen rather than displayed. Tension in their lives had become layered. There was the public pressure, a chorus that did not necessarily intend harm but operated without empathy, and there was the private pressure of internalized expectation, the voice that asked whether being seen was worth the cost. Each day, the choice repeated, to contract under scrutiny or to expand into a self that might not be acceptable to everyone. The rising action of Maya's life consisted not only of external tests, but of incremental affirmations, little victories stitched together. Then came the turning point that would force these tensions into confrontation. An office email, ostensibly about a client social responsibility initiative, invited employees to a gala. Jonah would host. The theme was "Make it memorable," a phrase that made Maya's stomach turn. The gala would be televised, attended by clients with power and influence. This was a stage where being memorable could cement reputations or ruin them. Jonah's eyes crinkled when he mentioned it, a man who coveted the optics of success. Maya stood in her small kitchen that night, palms pressed against cold tiles, thinking of the piano tune and Liam's calm hands. The melody resounded, and with it came a stubborn thought. She would not let others write the last line of her sentences. She would attend the gala, and if asked, she would dance. Not to prove a point, not for the cameras, but because she needed the movement to speak. She texted Liam, "I'll go Saturday. If you come, I'll dance." His reply took longer than she liked to arrive. When it did, it was short and steady. "I'll be there." By choosing to show up, Maya did not solve anything. She only layered her courage. She did not palm all danger, but planted herself where risk and recklessness met possibility. The tension now had a new quality. It was no longer merely externalized judgment and internal doubt. It was a heavy, pulsing question about how much of herself she would let the world take, and how much she would take back. The gala unfurled like a slow tide. Gilded invitations, polished shoes, and a playlist curated to smooth every social edge. It was precisely the atmosphere where optics outweighed authenticity. Maya arrived in a dress that felt like an armor of color. People scanned her as if checking a chart, and the familiar ripple of opinion began to form. Jonah was in his element, hosting with a practiced grin, moving through clusters of clients with the speed of someone who understood that brief impressions were currencies. The organizers had set a small stage near the center, and a grand piano sat under spotlights like an object both ceremonial and intimate. When the MC announced an impromptu music interlude, a hush gave way to polite applause. Maya's heartbeat mapped the room's tempo. She could leave. She could slip out through a side door. But she said to herself a phrase that had become a kind of anchor. This is for you, not for them. As if choreographed to her resolve, Liam approached the piano and sat. The bench settled with him as though it had been waiting. He looked at her for a second, the sort of look that told her he understood the weight on her shoulders without trying to carry it. Then he placed his fingers to the keys. The first notes unfurled slow and sure. The melody was the same one that had once come to her like a promise. This time, though, it seemed to declare more than nostalgia. It was a manifesto. Maya stepped forward into a pool of light and began to move. The audience reacted predictably. Phones rose, whispers threaded through the room. Jonah's smile stiffened in a manner that suggested disapproval disguised as concern. Some of the guests shifted, as though witnessing something improper. A board member's eyes narrowed. The room, which had watched Maya shrink for months, now watched her expand. Midway through the piece, a man from the marketing team, someone with a taste for decisive gestures, stood and cleared his throat. "This isn't appropriate for the occasion," he said loudly, the phrase a public indictment that made her skin heat. "We should stick to a professional tone." Maya could have stopped. The camera lenses and the human stares pressed like a physical weight. The pressure to conform crackled, and whispers moved like a current. Jonah leaned forward. "Maybe keep it tasteful, Maya," he murmured, the subtext clear. Her first instinct was to contract into a smaller version of herself, to avoid making the discomfort of others her responsibility. But the music threaded through her, stronger than anxiety. She remembered Mrs. Ortega's face and Elise's quiet courage. She thought of the workshop and of the woman who had said, "You made me remember how to move like myself." The memory of her grandmother humming in the kitchen rose like a small, defiant flame. She chose movement. She let her arms speak a language older than condemnation. Each step was not an answer to the critic, but a reaffirmation of self. The crowd's murmurs shifted tone. Some softened into wonder, others hardened into disapproval. A client, influential and conservative, actually began to smile, letting his shoulders relax into the music's sway. Then Jonah stood, his decision rapid as a firing synapse. "Enough," he said, voice cutting through the melody. "This isn't the place." It could have ended there, an authority closing the scene. But Maya pivoted. She turned toward Jonah, not in anger but with a calmness that felt like truth. "This is the place for honesty," she said, voice steady enough to be heard across the room. "If celebrating authenticity makes you uncomfortable, maybe your idea of appropriate needs a broader definition." The statement landed like a pebble, rippling outward. Jonah's face contorted into something between annoyance and disbelief. He opened his mouth to respond, something about brand safety and expectations, but the words met a wall of other voices. Elise stood, then a few others. Employees who had quietly admired her candor rose and joined in. Even the client smiled more broadly, and one of the younger interns clapped, genuinely and loudly. The room separated into factions, but the momentum had shifted. Maya danced to the end of the piece with a grace that belonged to someone who had chosen her center. When Liam closed the final chord, applause came, not universal, but palpable. It was not just for the movement, but for the act of daring to be oneself in a room that had preferred conformity. Jonah met her after the applause, and for a moment she feared recrimination. Instead, he said, with a brittle politeness, "This will have consequences." "Maybe," Maya replied. "Maybe it will remind people that consequence isn't always punishment." That night, some professional consequences followed. A minor client pulled back from a campaign she had been leading, citing concerns about image. Some colleagues texted thinly veiled judgments, but other things shifted too. Social media picked up the moment with a different spin. Many praised her bravery, others derided her. A hashtag, #DanceYourTruth, began to trend among smaller communities that loved the audacity of choice. Donations to the community center where she taught spiked. Elise received an internal commendation for team leadership after publicly supporting Maya. The stakes were real, but the rewards were human. The climax was not about winning an argument with Jonah. It was about choosing integrity over acquiescence. By the time Maya left the gala, throat raw from exertion and exhilaration, she felt fatigue and a rare kind of courage. She had not erased the critics, nor had she wanted to. She had instead made herself an actor in a story she would own. After the gala, the days felt like the fine, exacting work of knitting together a self that had been stretched. Consequences arrived with the sober pace of reality. A client campaign she had shepherded lost momentum, and whispers within the office hinted she might be sidelined in upcoming pitches. Jonah, who had once smoothed over difficult decisions with humor, kept a distance that was loud in its silence. But alongside these professional tremors came a different currency, a growing inner steadiness. People who had always liked Maya for her brightness now saw her as someone who could risk being vulnerable. Elise's quiet advocacy did not evaporate. She brought Maya into meetings and made sure her voice was heard, defending her ideas with a matter-of-fact insistence that felt like a hand at the back. Beyond the office, Maya's life began to rearrange in ways she had not foreseen. Her workshop enrollment grew. People sent messages telling her they had dared to dance in their kitchens because of her. The community center, initially a small, dust-swept room, received an influx of donations that allowed them to buy new speakers and hire another teacher. Mrs. Ortega began attending every class and sometimes cried quietly at the end of sessions. Those small human changes provided a steadying backbone to the larger, more chaotic social media reverberations. Liam remained a constant, not in the way storms are constant, sudden and sweeping, but like the weather that holds true in its cycles. He attended her workshops, sat in the back of the room with a cup of coffee, and later, after a class ended, they would walk home through streets washed clean by rain. He never pressed her for performance. He simply listened, and listening became a gift she had not expected to receive. Their relationship evolved gently, measured in practical acts rather than declarations. He brought her a battered book of poetry he thought she'd like. She taught him to stretch before dancing to avoid cramps he would later complain about. They learned each other's small habits, the slight hitch of Liam's laugh, the way Maya read aloud when thinking, and built intimacy in the space where flourishes were unnecessary. One evening, months after the gala, they sat on a low stoop, the city's distant hum a steady bass. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly, fingers tracing a line on the back of his hand. Maya considered the question for a long breath. "No," she said. "I regret the pain it caused me sometimes. But I don't regret the stand itself." "How did you keep going when it got hard?" She thought of Elise and Noor and Mrs. Ortega. She thought of the music that started it all, of the way a simple tune had unlatched something inside her. "I found people who remember the whole me, not the edited parts," she said. "And I remembered how to move for myself." Professional life, meanwhile, demanded navigation and strategy. Maya met with her manager, who offered a compromise. A chance to lead smaller internal projects that allowed for creative risk, but kept the client-facing voice more measured. It was not a promotion, but it was an acknowledgement of value. More importantly, it was a sign that the workplace could adapt. It did not have to cast her out in order to keep its image intact. She also found opportunities to collaborate on projects that valued emotional honesty. A nonprofit reached out, asking her to design a campaign centered on mental health and expression. The brief allowed for the kind of work she loved, risky, textured, human. It was a new kind of validation, not the superficial clapping of viral metrics, but the slower, richer appreciation of meaningful impact. As months unspooled, Jonah's role in her life diminished to background static. He remained sharp, sometimes cruel, occasionally reasonable. A few weeks after the gala, he called her into his office for a formal conversation. "We need to talk about brand alignment," he said, the corporate phrase like a velvet blade. He hinted she might be better suited for a role that involved less public-facing ambiguity. Maya listened. She did not argue. She accepted the outcome with the grace of someone who knew what she valued. She took the minor reassignment not as defeat, but as a chance to steer her own course. "If that's the path the company wants," she told him, "I'll do the work. But I won't disappear." He nodded in that way that sometimes indicates respect, rare but not extinct. "I hope you understand this isn't personal." "It is personal," she said simply. "Work is part of life." She kept working. She kept teaching. She kept moving. And in the gaps between duty and rest, she learned something crucial, that public opinion could be a force but not the final arbiter of joy. The joy of dancing had returned to its original form. Private, stubborn, and persistent. A subtle shift in the office culture began to reveal itself. The agency started to promote projects that took emotional risks, not because of Meyer alone, but because a small movement had made space. Elise and other allies circulated ideas that valued human stories, not mere metrics. A few months later, the firm won an award for a campaign that centered authenticity. Maya was not the lead on the project, but she had been part of its early development. When the team celebrated, her applause felt different. It was not performative, but earned. On a quieter level, personal relationships deepened. Noor, who had once pleaded for caution, admitted at a family dinner that she had been frightened not by judgment, but by the possibility of losing her sister to public scorn. "I didn't understand courage," Noor said one night, tears quietly making tracks down her cheeks. "I thought keeping you safe meant keeping you small. I'm sorry." Forgiveness is a gentle, domestic thing. Maya accepted it the way one accepts a clean dish, without theatrics. Healing in family is not fireworks. It is the incremental realignment of small habits. Noor began to attend her workshops sometimes, surprising Maya by arriving early and staying late. Then there were the small community victories. The center expanded hours, new volunteers arrived, and the woman who had once called her dramatic now attended classes and moved in a way that made her laugh. Human lives shifted because one person had chosen to keep moving. Maya also faced internal reckonings. She had to confront an old voice that still whispered, "What if every choice costs you?" The fear was not irrational. Consequence had real teeth. She worked with a therapist who helped her unpack the iteration of shame lodged deep in her spine. Therapy was not cinematic. It involved slow, incremental remapping of thought patterns and the deliberate practice of self-compassion. She learned to name the intrusive thoughts: comparison, fear of judgment, abandonment, and to respond to them as one would to a small child, with patience and boundaries. Liam, gentle in predictable ways, supported without dictating. One afternoon, when Maya felt particularly worn, he surprised her with a simple thing: a record player and an old vinyl of the tune that had changed everything. They sat on a threadbare rug and let the needle find the groove. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. The music was enough. In these small rituals, cooking together, reading out loud, moving through a living room as if it were a ballroom, they built a life less performative and more honest. Over time, the sharpened corners of earlier conflicts dulled. Jonah remained in the office like a weather vane, often pointing in the most convenient direction of power. Clients continued to prefer safe bets sometimes and risk at others. Maya learned to pick her battles. She learned that standing up did not always mean standing at the front of a stage. Sometimes it meant whispering truth into small rooms until the sound amplified. The falling action of her story became a catalog of steadying choices: showing up to teach, saying no to projects that compromised her values, mentoring a young recruit who reminded her of herself, and taking a company retreat where she not only attended but spoke about the importance of allowing people to be whole. Each act was a stitch. Each stitch made her garment of life more tolerable to wear. Months later, Maya stood in her modest living room bathed in late afternoon light, the city's hum a familiar lullaby. The viral clip was a memory with multiple versions, some unkind, some kind, but none of them held the final claim on her life. She was neither triumphant nor defeated. She was present, a woman who had learned how to move in spite of being watched. She played the old melody on a battered keyboard Liam had left at her place once, and let her body follow without audience or agenda. The dance this time was quieter, a conversation between limbs and breath. It was everything and nothing like the one on the gala floor. It was hers. Her phone buzzed with a message from Noor. "Saw your class on the feed. You were beautiful. So proud." A moment later, Liam texted a photo of a tiny puddle of rain reflecting city lights. The caption read, "For when you need a little extra shine." Maya smiled, feeling the warmth move through her like sun through glass. She had not eradicated the critics. They remained as part of the weather. But she had found the instruments with which to weather them: community, movement, and an inner scale of worth. The last chord of her journey was not a fanfare, but a steady note that sustained itself. Proof that she could, if she chose, dance like they would never let go.